Dear students, welcome back. In this video, I am going to explain one more very interesting story from your textbook in English, Hornbill, class 11th. The name of the chapter is The Silk Road by Nick Middleton, chapter 8. In the chapter Silk Road, the narrator explains his experiences that he had during his pilgrimage to Mount Kailash to complete the Korah. Pilgrimage is a journey to a holy place. Now, what is Korah? Korah is a type of meditation by walking around a temple or other sacred site. Here, Mount Kailash. Now, Mount Kailash. Mount Kailash is a very famous and important Hindus worship place. The chapter is actually a travelogue. Now, what is travelogue? Meaning of travelogue is a film or a book or experiences illustrated about the places visited by a traveler. The route taken by the narrator was known as the Silk Route in the past. The Silk Route was a series of ancient trade networks that connected China and the Far East with countries in Europe and the Middle East. The route included a group of trading posts and markets that were used to help in the storage, transport and exchange of goods. It was also known as the Silk Road. Now let's start the story. The chapter starts with the scenic beauty. It was a perfect natural beauty of the place when the narrator was leaving Ravu for his pilgrimage to Mount Kailash to complete the Korah. And you know what is Korah? A perfect half moon floated in a perfect blue sky on the morning. Clouds glowed pink as the sun rose to splash the distant mountain tops with a rosy blush. When the narrator was leaving, Lamo told him that she wanted to give him something. Lamo was taking care of the narrator. She wanted to give him a farewell present. She gave him a long-sleeved sheepskin coat because he needed some warmer clothes for the cold at Mount Kailash. When they were entering into the car to start their journey, the driver, Sitan, looked at the narrator and said, "Drogba, sir," means he wanted to say that the narrator was looking like a Drogba, meaning a shepherd. Drogba means shepherd. Driver Sitan took the narrator in his car with Daniel. Now these three people took a shortcut to get off the Changtang. Sitan knew a way that would take them southwest almost directly towards Mount Kailash. The route involved crossing several fairly high mountain passes. Sitan informed the narrator, "If there is no snow, sir, we will not have any problem, sir." And when the narrator asked him what was the likelihood of possibility of that situation, Sitan replied, "Not knowing, sir, until we get there." So he was not sure about the upcoming situation. From the gently rolling hills of Ravu, they drove across vast plains when they saw a few gazelles. And as they moved on, the plains became more stony than grassy. They came across a herd of wild asses. As they went near them, the asses galloped away, leaving a trail of dust behind them. After that, they passed solitary drogmas or shepherds tending their flocks. Sometimes men and sometimes women would pause and stare at their car, occasionally waving as they passed. And when the trek took them close to the animals, the sheep would take evasive action, veering or moving away from the speeding vehicle. The narrator and his two companions passed nomads' dark tents pitched in splendid isolation with the huge Tibetan dogs called Tibetan Mastiff. These beast-looking dogs would cock their big heads when they became aware of the approach of the narrator and his companions and fix them in their sights. As they continued to draw closer, they would explode or burst into action, speeding directly towards them like a bullet from a gun and nearly as fast. These Tibetan Mastiff dogs are described as shaggy monsters, blacker than the darkest night. They usually wore bright and red collars and barked furiously with massive jaws. They were completely fearless of the narrator's vehicle, shooting straight into their path and causing Sitan to brake and swerve, meaning to turn aside. These dogs became popular in China's imperial courts as hunting dogs. They were brought along the Silk Road into China as a tribute from Tibet. And now the narrator and his companions could see the snow-capped mountains. They entered a valley where the river was wide and mostly clogged, meaning of clogged, obstructed or clogged with ice, shining in the sunshine. The path was along the bank, twisting with the meanders, meaning of meanders, turns, twisting with the meanders as they gradually gained height and the valley sides closed in. The turns became sharper and ride became bumpier. They continued their climb, laboring through steeper slopes with big rocks. The narrator felt the pressure building up in his ears due to the height. They struggled round another tight bend and Sitan stopped. Sitan had opened his door and jumped out of his seat. When the narrator was getting confused why Sitan had to come out of the car, Daniel, their companion, informed him that Sitan came out of the car to see the snow. Daniel also exited the vehicle, letting in the breath of cold air as he did so. A strip of snow lay across the track at 5,210 meters height above sea level. It stretched for about 15 meters on that dirt trail. The bank was too steep for their vehicle to move. No way around the snow patch. Seaton tested the snow's sturdiness or firmness. The snow was not looking too deep to the narrator. But Daniel said that if they slipped off, there was a big risk for the car to turn over. Sitan grabbed handfuls of dirt and threw them across the frozen surface. Daniel and the narrator stayed out of the vehicle to lighten Sitan's load. Sitan backed up and drove towards the dirty snow, eased the car and to its icy surface and slowly drove its length without apparent difficulty. After 10 minutes, they faced another snow blockage. This time, Sitan decided to try and drive round the snow. The slope was steep and full of major rocks, but somehow Sitan passed them. His four-wheel vehicle lurching from one obstacle to next. Meaning of lurching is making sudden and unsteady movements. In doing so, he cut off one of the hairpin bends, meaning very sharp bends, regaining the trail and further up where the snow had not drifted. The narrator checked his watch. They crept past 5,400 meters. His head began to throb horribly. They finally reached the top of the pass at 5,515 meters. It was marked by large tomb-like boundaries of rocks, decorated with white silk scarves and prayer flags. Sitan checked the tires. He partially opened the petrol tank and it gave a loud hiss. The lower atmospheric pressure had made the fuel expand. It was 2 o'clock by the time they stopped for lunch. They ate hot noodles inside a long canvas tent. The plateau has salt flats and brackish lakes and vestiges or residuals or remains of Tethys Ocean. Salt flats means areas of low flat land covered with salt. Brackish means somewhat salty. Now, Tethys Ocean. The Tethys Ocean, also called the Tethys Sea or the Neo-Tethys, was an ocean during much of the Mesozoic era located between the ancient continents of Gondwana and Laurasia before the opening of the Indian and Atlantic Oceans during the Cretaceous period. There was a hive of activity there. Means so many activities happening together. The workers wearing sheepskin coats and salt encrusted boots were working with pickaxes and shovels. Salt encrusted boots means boots covered with salt. Piles of salt were being carried by the trucks from that place. By late afternoon, they reached the small town of Hor, back on the main east-west highway. It followed the old trade route from Lhasa to Kashmir. Daniel was returning to Lhasa, so he found a ride in a truck. The narrator and Sitan bade him farewell outside a tire repair shop. At this point, the three became two. The narrator and Sitan. They had suffered two punctures in quick succession on the drive down from the salt lake, and Sitan wanted to fix them since they left him with no spares. The narrator found Hor a miserable place, as there was no vegetation but dust and rocks, liberally scattered with the years of accumulated refuse. It was very disappointing for the narrator as the town sat on the shore of Lake Mansarovar. Lake Mansarovar is the most respected or revered stretch of water of Tibet. As per the ancient Hindu and Buddhist cosmology, it is the source of four great Indian rivers: the Indus, the Ganges, the Satluj and the Brahmaputra. Actually, only the Satluj flows from the lake. The headwaters of the others all rise nearby on the flanks or sides of Mount Kailash. The narrator's experience in Hor was in sharp contrast to that of the Japanese monk Eikai Kawaguchi. Kawaguchi was so moved by the Mansarovar lake that he burst into tears. Swan Hedin, a Swede, also became emotional or sentimental to see the hallowed or sacred waters of the lake. The narrator and Sitan finally left again and reached Darchen after 10:30 p.m. Darchen is situated right in front of the sacred mountain, Mount Kailash. Its altitude is 4,575 meters and is the starting point for pilgrimages in the region. The open air rubbish dump at Hor had set off the narrator's cold once more. He found one of his nostrils blocked again. He was not convinced, the narrator was not convinced for sure that the other nostril would provide him with sufficient oxygen. He looked at his watch and saw that he was at 4,760 meters. That height was not much higher than Ravu, and there he had been gasping for oxygen several times every night. He had grown accustomed or familiar to these nocturnal or relating to night disturbances by then. But they still scared him. He was tired and hungry, and he tried to sleep with single open nostril. But he felt his chest strangely heavy. He sat up. A movement gave him some relief. He tried to sleep again, but he couldn't. And this miserable condition persisted. He felt a little voice inside him saying that if he slept, he might never wake up again. So he had no other choice but to stay awake the whole night. Sitan took the narrator to the Darchen Medical College the next morning. He explained to the Tibetan doctor his problem. That is, his sleepless symptoms and his sudden aversion to lying down. The doctor asked him a few questions while feeling the veins in his wrist. The doctor told him that it was the effect of the cold and altitude. He gave him some medicines. And when the narrator saw those medicines, he found that they suspiciously looked like, sheep dung. However, the medicine proved big help to the narrator, and he was able to sleep very soundly. Sitan left the narrator to return to Lhasa. As a Buddhist, he told him that it mattered little if he died, but he thought it would be bad for his business. And now, because the narrator had a good sleep, Darchen did not look so horrible. It was still dusty and had heaps of rubble and rubbish. The sun shone brilliantly in a clear blue sky. The narrator saw the Himalayas across to the south. He could see the snow-capped mountain Gurla Mandhata. Darchen had a couple of general stores selling Chinese cigarettes, soap and other provisions. The place looked relaxed, but it was without pilgrims. Pilgrims were not visible there at that time because it was not the pilgrimage season, as the narrator had arrived for the beginning of the season and it seemed he was too early. One afternoon, the narrator sat in the only cafe of Darchen, taking tea and thinking over his options. He found that the options were very limited. So he concluded that he hadn't made much progress with his self-help program on positive thinking. The narrator thought that pilgrimage trail was well trodden, but he did not imagine doing it alone, that Kora alone. He needed companions for that. The Kora was seasonal because parts of the route had blockages by snow. He had no idea whether or not the snow had cleared, still clung to the banks of Darchin's brook. Also, he hadn't met anyone in Darchin with enough English to answer even this most basic question. At this point, he met a new character, Norbu. Norbu came near to the narrator and asked if he could sit opposite him at the table. They started talking with each other. The narrator saw Norbu. The narrator saw him wearing a wind cheetah and a metal rimmed spectacles of a Western style. The narrator thought that he was not from those parts. Norbu himself told that he was a Tibetan. Norbu worked in, he told the narrator that he worked in Beijing at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences in the Institute of Ethnic Literature. The narrator assumed that he was on some sort of fieldwork. On this question, Norbu replied, yes and no. He said, I have come to do the Kora. As soon as the narrator heard this, he became so excited and happy because he was so desperately searching for a companion to do his what? Kora. Norbu had been writing academic papers about the Kailash Kora and its importance in various works of Buddhist literature for many years, but he had never actually done it himself. So this shows that even Norbu had never experienced doing the Kora. When the narrator told Norbu the reason of his coming to Darchin, he became excited and excitedly he said, two academics who have escaped from the library. The narrator began to think that his positive thinking strategy was working after all. But this relief of the narrator was for a short time, it was short lived. As Norbu told him that he was almost as ill equipped as the narrator was for the pilgrimage. Means Norbu also did not have any experience of doing the Kora. And what kind of companion did the narrator want for his pilgrimage? An experienced one who has already experienced that, doing that Kora. So, therefore, the joy of the narrator was short lived. Norbu began to share with the narrator all sorts of negative things and the difficulties of completing the Kora. Norbu kept telling how fat he was and how hard it was going to be. He kept reminding the narrator, very high up, so tiresome to walk. So all these words, that the companion began to use with the narrator. Norbu was actually not a practicing Buddhist, but he had enthusiasm and he was, of course, a Tibetan. The narrator originally imagined making the trek in the company of the devout believers, and on reflection, he decided that perhaps Norbu would turn out to be the ideal companion. Norbu suggested to hire some yaks to carry their luggage, which the narrator thought was a good sign. And also, Norbu had no intention of prostrating himself all round the mountain. Prostrating means throw oneself flat on the ground so as to be lying face downwards, especially in reverence or submission. Norbu cried, not possible, collapsing across the table in hysterical laughter. It wasn't his style, and anyway, his tummy was too big. So, this is the end of the story. And students, to have a clear understanding of this chapter, kindly watch this video at least twice. Kindly like, subscribe and share. Thank you for watching.